She got off the train with nothing but a crumpled letter and a promise that someone would be waiting. But when she arrived, there was no one, just cold stares and cruel laughter. The letter A prank, her last hope. A joke. Then one man stepped forward and offered her shelter for the night. What he didn't know was that this broken stranger would soon risk her life to save his daughter and change everything. If this one moved you, subscribe for more. Real stories from the Wild West about second chances, quiet courage, and finding home where you least expect it. The train pulled away from the platform, leaving a cloud of red dust hanging in the air. Nara Holt stood there alone as the crowd thinned and scattered. The iron wheels faded into the distance. All she had was an old suitcase, a pair of worn-out shoes, and a crumpled letter clutched in her hand. The words on the paper were simple. "I'll be waiting at the station. Harlan Colton." But no one had come. Nara looked around. The only things she found were cold, mocking eyes staring back at her. A woman leaned in and whispered loud enough for others to hear. Another Apache half-breed coming to find her husband. The group around her burst into laughter. Nara took a deep breath, swallowing the tears that were rising in her throat. The scars on her wrists throbbed faintly, as if reminding her of everything she'd already survived. She had been rejected 3 times before, all because of the blood running through her veins. And yet, this time, she had believed. She had believed in that letter like it was the last bit of magic she had left. A small hand tugged at the hem of her dress. It was a little girl, maybe 3 years old, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes. "Lady, why are you crying?" The innocent voice stopped Nara cold. She managed a faint smile and spoke softly, her voice barely carrying over the wind. "I'm looking for a man. He said he'd be here tonight, but no one came." The whole station went quiet for a moment. Then the laughter started again, louder this time. Crueler. But there was one man who didn't laugh. Elias Carver stood a few steps away, tall and silent in his dust-covered leather coat. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and rough. "It gets cold out here at night. You can stay at my ranch if you need to. It's less windy there." The Montana night wind howled through the pine trees as Elias Carver led his horse along the patchy, ice-covered dirt road. Nara sat behind him, clutching a tattered shawl. The cold air slipped through her fingers like tiny needles. In the distance, a soft yellow light from a small wooden cabin appeared through the mist, the only warm glow in a sea of prairie darkness. Elias pulled the horse to a stop at the front porch and said quietly, "You can rest here for the night. In the morning, if you like, I'll take you back to the station." His voice was deep and firm, but not unkind. Nara simply nodded and followed him inside. The cabin smelled of burning pine mixed with smoke and damp earth. The smell of life itself. A little girl ran out from the back room and squealed. "Daddy." Elias bent down and picked her up. "Lily, remember to wash your hands before dinner." When he turned back, Nara saw something in his eyes, a quiet sorrow, the kind that belonged to someone who had seen too much taken away. She took the bowl of soup he handed her, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you. I didn't mean to intrude." Elias shook his head. Everyone needs shelter when night falls. Lily sat at the table, staring curiously at Nara's thick black hair and dark eyes. "Are you one of Mama's people?" Elias froze. The room seemed to hold its breath. He replied softly, "Your mother was Apache, too, but she's gone now." Nara lowered her head. That sentence felt like an invisible thread weaving the two of them together. They both knew what it felt like to have the world turn its back on you simply for not being white enough to belong. After dinner, Elias stirred the fire again and laid a thick blanket near the hearth. "You can sleep here. My daughter's room is just next door." He turned to leave, but Nara spoke gently. "Thank you. Not everyone is willing to let someone like me inside their home." Elias paused, then said quietly, "Not everyone understands what it's like to have every door shut in your face." Nara watched his silhouette disappear down the hallway. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks in the door, but the fire in the hearth kept burning steadily. For the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely abandoned. The next morning, the Montana sun rose slowly beneath a cold, gray sky. Nara stepped out of the house wrapped in the wool scarf Lily had draped over her shoulders, her breath visible in the frosty air. She needed to find some reason to believe that the letter hadn't been a lie. The town was the same as ever, dusty, cold, and unforgiving. The general store hadn't fully opened yet. From the saloon came the low murmur of a few men. "I heard she believed in some ghost-written love letter. Half-bloods, they never learn shame." Nara walked straight to the post office, the crumpled paper in her hand, now damp with sweat. "I'm looking for someone named Harlan Colton," she said, her voice shaking from the cold and from fragile hope. The station master, an old man, let out a soft sigh and scratched his chin. "You're the one who got that letter?" "Yes." "Do you know him?" He avoided her eyes, then spoke quietly. "Harlan Colton doesn't exist. It was a prank by some of the town kids. They sent out a few letters and laugh. Every time someone writes back, all sound around Nara seemed to fade." The letter slipped from her fingers onto the wooden floor. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, as the cold crept into the deepest part of her chest. A prank. Her whole life, that one last flicker of hope, had been nothing more than a joke. Outside, the wind picked up and swept the scarf from her shoulders. She stepped out of the post office, her head low. People on the street watched her pass, part pity, part disdain. By evening, as darkness slowly covered the prairie, Nara returned to the Carver ranch. She had planned to gather her things and leave before nightfall, but as she reached the gate, Lily ran out, her face smudged with dirt, her tiny hands gripping Nara's skirt tightly. "Mommy, stay." Those two words cut like a knife and healed like a miracle. Nara knelt down and wrapped the little girl in her arms, her tears soaking the child's shoulder. Elias stood on the porch, his gray eyes watching them in silence. When Nara finally looked up, he said just one simple sentence: "If you need to stay until the snow melts, this house is warm enough." Nara didn't reply. She only nodded, the fire of sunset reflecting in her eyes like a small spark of hope glowing in the cold land. The days that followed passed slowly beneath a thin layer of Montana snow. Nara stayed on, helping Elias mend fences, build fires, and cook meals. At first, Elias spoke little, offering only the words that were necessary. But Lily was different. She was a small ray of sunshine in the otherwise quiet house. Each morning, Nara and Lily went down to the stream to wash clothes. Nara taught the little girl old Apache songs, simple melodies full of longing and memory. Lily repeated each word, sometimes with such sweet clumsiness that Nara couldn't help but laugh. It had been a long time since she'd laughed like that. One evening, the wind howled outside, and Lily suddenly came down with a high fever. Elias panicked, pressing cool water to her forehead. But the heat wouldn't break. "Do you know what to do?" he asked, his voice rough and edged with desperation. Nara nodded, and ran into the snowy woods, returning with a bundle of dried leaves and bark. She boiled them in water, letting the steam rise, then placed warm cloths over the child's chest. As she sang softly, she rubbed Lily's forehead with a homemade herbal balm, the scent of mint blended with pine resin. Elias sat silently nearby, watching her. Every movement she made was gentle, like the touch of a true mother. The next morning, Lily opened her eyes and whispered, "Mama." Elias froze. Nara smiled, blinking back tears. She thinks I'm her mother." Elias lowered his head and said quietly, "Maybe she's not wrong." From that day on, something changed in the air of the house. Lily clung to Nara, telling stories, asking questions, laughing with a joy that filled every corner. Elias still spoke little, but his eyes no longer held the same distance when he looked at Nara. One night, as Nara mended his shirt under the soft glow of the oil lamp, Elias watched her sun-scarred hands work carefully and said, "You work like someone who was born to live here." Nara paused her stitching, smiled, and replied, "No one is born to be hated forever." Mr. Carver. Outside, the wind still moved through the pines, but inside the small wooden house, the fire in the hearth burned steadily like the warmth of a family slowly coming back together. I'm truly grateful for your presence here. If this story reminded you of old days, of dusty afternoons, and the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, then please subscribe to my channel so that each day we can sit together once more. And I can tell you another story from the Wild West. That morning, the sky was covered in a silver-gray hue after the snowstorm from the night before. The whole prairie lay beneath a blanket of fog. Elias was repairing the fence behind the horse stable, while Lily played near the small stream that wound around the house. Nara hung blankets on the porch rail, glancing over from time to time, a soft smile on her lips. But in a single instant, the wind howled sharply. A sheet of ice cracked, and a small, piercing scream broke through the still air. "Daddy!" Nara spun around, her heart tightening painfully. Lily was gone. Only the little red scarf floated aimlessly along the freezing water. Without thinking, Nara dove in. The spring flood surged violently. The icy water sliced into her skin like 1,000 blades. She plunged deep, feeling blindly through the murky current. When her hands found the tiny body, she pulled the girl close and pushed Lily upward toward the thin glimmer of light above the surface. Elias heard the scream, dropped his axe, and ran. He reached the stream just in time to see Nara thrust the child onto the bank before the current tore her away. "Hold on," Elias shouted, leaping into the freezing torrent. His limbs went numb instantly, but he fought through it, grabbed her arm, and pulled with all his strength. Both of them collapsed onto the shore, gasping for air. Lily coughed and began to cry, but Nara's body went still, her lips turning pale. Elias held her against his chest, slapping her cheeks, shouting hoarsely, "Don't you die on me. Not now." He carried her inside, laying her near the fireplace. All through the night, Elias sat behest, holding her icy hands, rubbing them fiercely to bring her back. When dawn broke, Nara let out a faint breath. Her eyes opened. "Haze." As if waking from a dream, Elias leaned close, his voice rough with fear and exhaustion. "You jumped into that river. Do you even realize you almost died?" Nara's weak smile flickered. "A mother always jumps, no matter how cold the water is." Elias said nothing. He only tightened his grip on her hand. And for the first time, the look in his eyes was not just quiet. It was the raw fear of losing something more precious than life itself. A few days later, the snow began to melt from the rooftops. Thin sunlight streamed through the window, brushing softly across Nara's pale face. She was still lying in bed, her breathing slow, the faint scent of herbs lingering in the air. Lily sat beside her, the little girl's small hand wrapped tightly around Nara's. Elias stood silently in the corner of the room, his weathered face drawn and his eyes red from too many sleepless nights. He looked at the two of them, the child and the woman who had risked her life to save her, and something tender and painful stirred deep within him. In the stillness of the late morning, Lily lifted her head and whispered, her voice as soft as the wind, "Mama Nara, can you stay here with me forever?" Time seemed to stop. Nara looked at the little girl, tears welling in her eyes until they fell onto that tiny hand. She nodded gently, her voice trembling. "If you want me to, I won't go anywhere." Elias turned away, trying and failing to steady his breath. He stepped out onto the porch, staring across the wide prairie still streaked with patches of snow. His thoughts tangled and restless. He had once sworn never to let anyone into his life again after his wife's death. His heart had turned entirely to ash. But now that ash was beginning to burn again, rekindled by a woman the whole town had scorned. By afternoon, when Nara was finally strong enough to sit up, Elias came in carrying a bowl of warm soup. He set it on the table and spoke in a low, rough voice. "I once thought I'd forgotten how to trust anyone. But you made me believe again." Nara looked at him, the glow of the fire flickering in her dark, deep eyes. "I didn't come here for pity, Elias. I only wanted to be somewhere I didn't have to beg to be allowed to live." He stepped closer, his rough hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Then stay, not out of pity, but because I need you, both I and the little one." A soft wind passed through the window, making the flame in the hearth tremble. Nara bowed her head, tears falling silently onto her dress. For the first time, she was no longer the one cast aside, but the one chosen to stay. Rumors travel faster than the Montana wind. In the saloon at the edge of town, people whispered that rancher Elias Carver had married a woman half Apache. Someone sneered, "Guess he wants his kids speaking savage talk." The cruel words spread like wildfire, reaching all the way to the Carver ranch, where Nara still lit the fire each morning and sang Lily to sleep each night. At first, no one dared to come near. Traders cut off supplies. The salt merchant refused to do business. Elias said nothing. He simply rode for miles to get what they needed. But that night, when he saw Nara wiping away tears after yet another cold shoulder from town, he said quietly, "You don't need anyone's permission to be here. This is your home." Then the drought came. The earth cracked open. Wells ran dry. Livestock lay dead across the fields. The town fell into despair. And in that moment, Nara stepped into the town square carrying ancient Apache maps and pointed to the southern ridge where an underground spring still flowed. "That land is sacred to my ancestors," she said, "but if the town needs it, I'll show the way." No one believed her. But when they dug, water burst from the earth clear, sweet water that saved the town from thirst, and in that silence, they all stared at the woman they had once scorned, standing tall beneath the sun, her black hair dancing in the wind. The next day, the first to arrive at the ranch were the elderly couple who had once mocked her at the train station. They brought a sack of flour and an awkward smile. We owe you our thanks. Elias stood beside Nara, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. From that day on, people began to call her Mrs. Nara Carver. There were no more whispers of contempt, only respectful greetings when she passed through the market. And on a spring morning, as the church bells rang out across the land, the people of Montana witnessed something rare. Rancher Carver and his Apache wife walking side by side, heads held high, faces unhidden, smiling, like two souls who had finally found the place where they belonged. 1 year later, the seasons had changed in Montana. The snow had melted, green grass stretched across the fields, and the wind carried the scent of new life. The Carver Ranch no longer stood in silence. Lily's laughter echoed everywhere, mixing with the sound of Elias hammering away at the frame of a new horse stable. Nara stood on the porch, her belly round with child. The sun-kissed glow on her skin, the soft curve of her smile, and the quiet light in her eyes made it easy to forget she had once been cast aside. Her simple wool dress fluttered in the breeze, and her hands no longer trembled when they touched the door of this house. That morning, the town gathered in front of the small church. For the first time, there were no whispers, no judging eyes. Everyone came to witness something they had once denied: the wedding of rancher Elias Carver and his Apache bride. Nara stepped inside, a delicate lace shawl draped over her shoulders, adorned with wildflowers Lily had placed there herself. Elias stood waiting by the wooden altar, and when their eyes met, all memories of snow, cold, and loneliness seemed to melt away. The minister spoke with a deep, gruff voice, simple, yet full of warmth. Before God, and before the winds of Montana, do you vow to shelter each other until your hair turns white? Elias took Nara's hand, his rough palm resting over her sun-darkened fingers, and answered softly, I do, and I promise that with all I am. The whole church was silent. Then Lily, in her little dress, cried out, now we're a real family. Laughter broke out warm and honest, like sunlight spilling through the wooden windows. That evening, Nara stood at the doorway, gazing across the wide-open fields. Elias stepped up beside her, wrapped his arm around her waist, and whispered, you once said you only needed a man for one night. Now you have all of my life. Nara smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Nearby, Lily chased butterflies, and the Montana sun sank in a blaze of gold over a peaceful land they had rebuilt from ashes. And to you, my dear listeners, true love doesn't need grand gestures or eternal vows. It lives in the hands that build fires on cold nights, in the eyes that understand without a single word. A family is not a perfect place. It's where you're accepted even when you're broken. It's where love is grown with patience and the courage to stay. It has been an honor to share this journey with you. I sincerely wish that you and your family find peace and happiness wherever you may be. I love all of you, my cherished audience of Wild West storytelling. I've spent years digging into frontier life, the real stories of people who rebuilt themselves when the world turned its back. This is one of those stories. 5 takeaway points, voice-ready perspective lines with examples. Point 1. Compassion doesn't ask questions, it just acts. Nara stood alone at the train station, humiliated and abandoned, clutching a fake letter while the crowd laughed. Elias didn't know her story. He just saw someone who needed shelter and said, it gets cold out here at night. You can stay at my ranch. No condición. No interrogación. Just the door left open. Point 2. Trust isn't earned through words. It's built quietly, day by day. Nara didn't make grand promises about staying or helping. She just picked up a bucket the next morning and started hauling water. She mended fences, cooked meals, taught Lily old Apache songs. Elias never asked her to prove herself. He just watched her work alongside him. And slowly, the distance in his eyes softened. Point 3. Love shows up in the moment. It's needed most. When Lily fell through the ice into that freezing stream, Nara didn't hesitate. She dove in without thinking, fought through the violent current, and pushed the little girl to safety before the water pulled her under. When Elias pulled her out and shouted, "You almost died," she just smiled and said, "A mother always jumps, no matter how cold the water is." Point 4. Belonging isn't something you're given, it's something you choose and fight for. When the town turned on them and cut off supplies because Elias had taken in a half Apache woman, he didn't flinch. He rode for miles to get what they needed. And when Nara saw the town dying of drought, she led them to sacred Apache land and gave them water, even after everything they'd done to her. Point 5. A family isn't built on perfection, it's built on the courage to stay. After the river, when Lily whispered, "Mama Nara, can you stay here with me forever?" Nara cried and nodded. Elias had sworn never to love again after losing his wife. But when he finally spoke, he didn't talk about the past. He just said, "Stay, not out of pity, but because I need you, both I and the little one." And that's when she became home. And tell me, how did this story make you feel? Leave a comment below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because more thrilling tales from the Wild West are just around the corner.